Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about a kind of a weird event from the 1990s called Babewatch. Um, Babewatch was something that Image did because the 1990s was this really hyper sexualized era for comic books. And I think some of my younger listeners who either were not alive in the 90s or at least were not old enough, to know what was going on. That's I think going to throw some people for kind of a loop because I feel like now things tend to have swung in the opposite direction. But mind you, when the Babe Watch event happened in November of 95, the internet had kind of just hit, but it was in its earliest stages, right? Um, it wasn't like today where you could just do like a Google image search and see a picture of whatever you want, basically, right? So the target demographic at the time, honestly, was guys who were just not quite old enough to like buy, say, Playboy magazine, right? And the guys making the comics, they knew what was going on. They know that the audience, um, they're in puberty and all that that entails. And so there was a demand for this imagery, right? And so, as near as I can tell, what happened was Image, who was already famous for TNA, you know what I mean? The Image girls really, back then were um they all, there's no delicate way to put it, they all looked like porn stars. The costumes were very skimpy. Image gave us stuff like Witchblade, which back then, they would basically just start with a nude woman and add just the tiniest bit of costume where they could basically legally sell it, right? So with all of this going on, Image decided, hey, let's do a whole month of comics where we turn all the male characters female too. Let's have even more TNA then, as I think what was going on their end. And the story of it was that, if I remember correctly, there was a witch who had cast a spell and it had done this, right? And so for a brief little window of time, all of the male characters at Image had become female. So since in our game, our Earth is like the crossover Earth where all of these characters come together, we were like, I guess we need to address this, right? Like, I guess it has to happen to our characters. So we ran one game where that had happened. And as an aside for a little bit, I need to talk about something else. So in real life, um, I was the only child of a single mother. And about the month before this happened, she had passed away from cancer. So I was very alone. And I took a month off where I didn't run the game at all for a month. And this was the first game where I came back from that and was trying to get back in the saddle, you know what I mean? And so what we had said was that my character, who I played the most, um, he had gotten into a fight with a villain called Blue Demon, not to be confused with Blue Devil, who is from DC and is a whole other character. Blue Demon was a character created for the GURPS role playing game, which at the time we were using. And he was one of their heavy hitters. And he was pretty much exactly what he sounds like. He was a demon. He was like the size of the Incredible Hulk. He was blue. He had a vaguely Skeletor kind of thing going on with his face. Um, and he had, the bat wings and all that jazz. And at any rate, um, because he was supernatural, he could sort of hone in on his prey. And to Blue Demon, it didn't matter if you were wearing a mask or not, right? Like Blue Demon would not at all be fooled if somebody like, say, Clark Kent or Diana Prince puts on a pair of glasses and dresses differently. Blue Demon would have more like soul vision. And so we had said what happened in the game was he had tracked my character down to his home where his family was, and my character was the only survivor. And that was kind of the reason I did that was I was working through these feelings in real life, and a lot of artists, and I do, I'm an art teacher. I do think of the game as art. It is a way that I express myself. It's a way that I express certain things I'm going through at that point in my life. So so we had said that there had been some life insurance involved and stuff like that. There was some money involved, and so my character decided to start a business, to take that money and try to grow it, right? And the other thing going on that there's kind of like a lot of levels to this one. The next thing I need to talk about is actually Dungeons and Dragons, which is going to sound very out of left field, but bear with me for a second. So when I would play D&D back in the day, um the way it usually worked would be like everybody, like a bunch of random characters that don't know each other, go to a tavern, and the town gets attacked by orcs or something like that, and you fight them and win. And one of them had a map or something like that on them, and then that was kind of the beginning of the trail of breadcrumbs that was going to lead you on this adventure that dungeon master wanted you to go on. And then before you would leave town, everybody would invariably always go to the general store. And in our games, the general store was just the place where all of the gear in the D&D books was for sale. So if you needed rope or a lantern or rations or a tent or whatever it was that your character thought you needed for that genre to go adventuring, he could just go buy it, equip himself, and be on his merry way, right? So, having come from some of that as my background, and I was still new at being a game master, I felt like it would be really nice if we had that in the superhero game too. And so the idea then was my character starts this business that he literally calls the Superstore. And it was in the local shopping mall. And he's at this store, it functioned like its D&D counterpart would, where the idea was superheroes could go to this store and they could buy grappling hooks and knockout gas and jetpacks and whatever trappings you would associate with the superhero genre, right? So if somebody wanted to, say, play a Rocketeer style character, but maybe their guy is a pilot and not an inventor, that character could just go to the superstore and buy his rocket pack. That was the whole concept. Was I was trying to help characters do whatever it was they were trying to do. So I had actually written that adventure before my mom had passed away. And then I didn't run the game for a little while, maybe like a month, where I was just kind of sad and I wasn't working at the time. I had actually gotten fired from a job because I had to drive my mom to chemotherapy all the time and stuff like that. It's a whole long story that's kind of beyond the scope of the channel. But so the point is, I just was doing nothing. I was not leaving the house. I just, you know, I I was just sitting around for like a while, and it took a bit before I felt like playing the game again. And so then I was trying to kind of get back in the saddle, and I already had this adventure set aside. I'm like, okay, so let's do that. And then when I swung by the comic book store at some point that week on Wednesday or whatever, comic book day was, um, I saw these Babewatch comics for sale. And I thought, well, that's interesting since our world is a crossover world where all of these characters and stuff converge. I felt like I was kind of stuck with this, right, as a thing that had to happen for us to, be part of that. Because again, our thinking on that whole thing was going to evolve over time, and I would feel no obligations like that now. But at the time I did. And so I'm like, oh man, I guess in the next game I got to turn all the guys into girls. And so I hadn't meant for these two things to coincide, but they did, right? So what happens is all the male superheroes wake up female one day, and this is November of 95. So they all wake up female, and none of their suits fit, right? So there was a character named Fist who was kind of a knockoff of the Incredible Hulk. Now he looked like She-Hulk. Completely different proportions, you know what I mean? So it just so happens this is the grand opening of a place that, among other things, sells super suits. And when I ran the game, the characters playing the game, which nobody minded the gender swap, by the way, I thought that was kind of interesting. Um, but so they show up and they buy costumes then. And so on opening day, like sales are booming because everybody suddenly needs a female version of their old suit. So we were doing that. And then again, I'm going to talk about D&D here for a second. For some people listening, they've never played D&D. They're here more for kind of the comic book end of things, and that is awesome. For some of the other people, they're not as into comics, but they're very into D&D. For the D&D guys listening, you might be able to relate to this. Have you ever played in a game, especially if you're a dungeon master? Have you ever ran a game where it gets to that moment where everybody goes shopping and what you kind of want is for them to like wrap it up, right? Like get your stuff and let's get on the road because I really am fired up about this dungeon that I've made that I want you guys to enter the dungeon and I want you to start solving my riddles and stumbling into my traps and all that jazz, right? And sometimes what happens is they won't stop shopping, right? I have personally seen it a million times. Around the year 2000, I ended up buying our local comic book store, and so I was kind of like the comic guy from The Simpsons. I was like always there. I sat in on a bazillion of other people's D&D games, and I saw it time and time and time again. And I always thought it was kind of funny. I don't know what it is about that, but guys in like a D&D type setting love to shop a lot, at least in my experience. Maybe for you listening, that didn't happen in your games. That's cool. But for me, it's like a huge thing. And so that happened. I can't even remember now because obviously it's been so many years since I ran this game, but I wanted them to get on with it. The whole idea was I don't know if we were going to go fight the witch that turned everybody into men or what. Excuse me, I meant to say into women. You know what I meant. But whatever it was that we were supposed to get on with it, right? It never happened. Um, I vividly remember I was going to art school and there was a classroom that nobody was using it. We were allowed to go in there after hours and paint stuff like that, and like nobody was using it at all. So it had huge tables, tons of chairs, stuff like that. And so that's where I invited all these guys on campus, like come to the art room and I'll run a game. And that was it. I remember this table and it was like basically a 20-foot by 20-foot square table where we'd pushed a couple other ones together and stuff. And everybody was sitting around it. And there was a lot of guys. There was like maybe a dozen guys or something. And they just wanted to shop. And it was killing me. I'm like, can we get on with it? We never did. They just shopped the entire time. And they were just kind of like, oh, I look around. Draw me a map of what the store looks like. And I kind of drew them an overhead map, of how the store would be laid out. And I'd be like, here's a rack of like superhero costumes. Here's a machine that will kind of scan you so that it can sort of like replicate a superhero costume for you and blah, 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 blah. And here's like a glass case that's just full of, whatever, grapple guns and stuff like that. And I was just describing this whole thing to them and they loved it. and we accomplished nothing. And then in the next adventure, like if we played that one in November of 95 and maybe we didn't play again until December had rolled around. I can't remember how it worked out now because of what I was going through in my home life. And then there's in the college thing. My college, the last day of school for the year was actually before Thanksgiving. And then the idea was they wanted the kids to go home for Thanksgiving to be with their families, but then get a job in whatever, a department store or something over Christmas, right? And then we didn't go back to school until like mid-January because they wanted us to earn more money to give them. you know, you owe us money. Give us whatever you made over that nice big break we gave you. So I couldn't tell you now how that worked. I don't remember that part of it with kids going home for the holidays, and then there were guys coming over to my place over Christmas break to play. But I don't know how that happened. I know that we played this in November. I know we were doing games in December then. I don't know how long it was between this one and the next game. But by the time we get to the next game, everybody is male again. We just kind of said the image characters handled the problem just like they did in the comics. And we weren't playing any image characters. We were playing original characters. Um, but yeah, that was the big Babewatch thing. Um, I thought it was funny. And then I teased the guys too, and this is probably going to offend somebody, but hopefully you take this as the joke it is intended as. It's meant as a lighthearted ribbing. And honestly, these days I have way more female players than male players, and they seem fine with this kind of humor. But I teased the guys. I said, "You guys have been female for all of 5 minutes, and I can't get you out of the clothing store or whatever. Do you want some purses to go with that grappling hook?" It was a lot of stuff like that. I thought it was pretty funny. And then also, I should probably mention the Superstore was it went over great. People loved it, and it became a fixture in the game for years. It moved out of the mall, and it became more of kind of like a Walmart sized place, as it took off. It became a chain. There were superstores in multiple cities and stuff like that. And we treated it a little bit like Planet Hollywood in a way, where you'd go into the superstores and they'd gotten their hands on some famous item. Like maybe one of them would have the old 1966 Batmobile on display in it or something of that nature. But yeah, that's the story with the superstore. It's the story with Babewatch, and it's sort of glossing over the thing with the Blue Demon and how he did a lot of damage around that time too. And then after that, they were looking for him. Everybody was gunning for him harder than they had before. But I think this is probably a good stopping point. This video has been kind of a chaotic blend of a bunch of different ideas. As always, leave us a comment. I would love to hear from you guys on anything we spoke about today. Whether it was, do you remember the Babe Watch event? Do you remember just the hypersexualization of comics in the 90s? Um, do you remember playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons where people won't stop shopping? Whatever. I love hearing from you guys. So I look forward to seeing your comments. I would love it if you supported the channel by hitting like and checking to see if you're still subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe people without telling them. But that's it for this one. From everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you guys have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.